welcome to another episode of Chatter, a podcast from The Gist. Our guest on today's show was Jardine, the Liberal Democrat MP for Edinburgh West. We had a great conversation about the current state of the Liberal Democrats, the party's role in the Brexit process in Parliament, including the absence of Vince Cable and Tim Farron from votes in the last round of amendments proposed by the ERG, and all about the plans, or suggested plans, that have been floating around the press for a new centrist party in the UK. A little bit of news before we start. We've just been in London doing a whole load of interviews with people from the Labour Remain campaign, the People's Vote campaign, from Get Britain Out, some journalists from DSmog UK, and a whole host of other interviews that we're going to have coming up in the next couple of weeks. So if you don't want to miss any of that, don't forget you can subscribe to us on Apple, on Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. So here's Jardine. So, Christine, it's lovely to chat to you. I'll just jump straight into it. Do you think it was right for Tim Farron and Vince Cable to miss the last round of votes on amendments to the Brexit bill?
I think that's something we've talked about and completely missed the point. They've apologised. They made a mistake, but do you know what? It was all about the fact that people were using it to draw attention away from the fact that so many Labour MPs had either abstained or voted with the government. That was the big thing on the night. The fact that we made a mistake which wouldn't have made any difference to the outcome was being used to deflect the fact that the Labour Party had handed victory to the government over Brexit. And that was what the crunch of the whole thing was.
That's a very fair point. I did think it was quite ironic that Tim Farron was giving a talk on the death of, I think, was it the death of liberalism during the votes, which I thought was quite ironic as much as you're right.
I don't think actually that's what Tim was talking about. That's one way. No, that's not what he was talking about. But as I say, that's not really relevant. What the issue is that we said that, but it was all a bit of a cover for other people for what had actually happened in the House. Okay,
so you think it was more of a let's talk about this because it seems interesting when it's not really, and it's what's more interesting is actually what's happened.
And we apologised, which we get to hear from the Labour Party.
That's a fair point, and I don't actually think that I don't think we've seen the full effect or the full meaning of what the amendments will mean, whether they're actually going to make it. I think they have to go to the Lords now, as far as I'm aware, and then they have to come back potentially. So we may not even see them come to fruition as anything that's going to impact the way that Brexit is going to play out.
So why did you say was it that doesn't make any sense if you think about your first question? You're questioning what Tim and Vince did, but now you're saying what the Labour Party did doesn't actually matter?
I'm questioning what they did because I like to see people in Parliament as much as possible, but ultimately I think that it probably won't have that much of an impact on the Brexit bill as a whole.
I think the problem that we have with the Brexit bill is that there are huge problems with it. I mean, we all know that the EU withdrawal bill, to give its correct name, that its purpose is to ensure that if we leave the European Union, we can trade the next day, that the Eurostar can go to Belgium and France, that flights can take off, that food can go back and forward to the continent, that we can actually get on with business. And I think that's, we have to accept that is the purpose of the bill, but within it, over the last few months, we've had an awful lot of debates on very important issues where, members of the Labour Party and members of the Conservative Party have bottled it at the last minute and have said, that, they were going to vote against the government, they were going to stand up for jobs in this country, which are dependent on the closest possible ties with the EU. And then at the last minute, they've bottled it. And to try and deflect that onto us when we're the only party which has been consistent, stood up for staying within the European Union, have argued and campaigned for that, have backed the people's vote. We're the only party who's done that. So to try and then at the last minute somehow pin the problems of a chaotic government and a Labour Party that doesn't know what it stands for and what it believes in, to try and pin them on us is a bit, nonsensical, really.
Well, to be honest, I think it's quite interesting that the press managed to miss an opportunity to lambast Labour. But I think you're right. And I think, that's all about spin. We're an easier target sometimes in Labour because, frankly, nobody's really quite sure what Labour stands for anymore, are they? And if, what we're reading in the last few days is anything to go by, a lot of Labour members are not actually sure what the party they've spent a lifetime in is standing for anymore. Yeah, it's an odd position that they're in. But look, I could talk about
Labour. It's a difficult position.
Yeah. So you used the word "if" when you were talking about if we Brexit or if we leave the European Union.
Yeah.
Does that mean that you think that there will be the people's vote, that will get a second chance to go yes or no to a final deal?
Well, this won't be a second chance. This will be the first chance because we've never seen the deal. We still don't know what the deal is, and there's less than 6 weeks of negotiating time left now. We're running out of time, and we're having people like Liam Fox saying, it's increasingly likely there'll be no deal. That would be catastrophic. So it's not another chance to vote in the deal. It would be our only chance to vote in the deal because we still don't know what it is. And I think there is still time for us to halt Article 50. There is still time for us to look at this and say, hang on a minute, none of us know what's going to happen. I find it very difficult as a politician being invited to events up and down the country to talk about Brexit and discovering that, you have to stand there and say to business people, to, people whose jobs depend on it, who, paying their mortgage will depend on what happens. And, a few months before we move out, having to say to them, I don't know. The government can't tell us. Nobody knows what the deal will be. It's chaos. Now, that is not a situation that I think is acceptable for people in this country. I think we should be demanding that we get better from this government and, frankly, from Her Majesty's official opposition, who seem to be absent from the whole proceedings in terms of any kind of standing up for the people, for opposing what's happening. They're helping the Conservatives deliver Brexit at every turn. And that Brexit is chaotic. And I think that, what we need is, as we're running up to this deadline, not knowing what's happening, what we need is some calm heads to say enough. Let's just stop and think about what we're doing. What is this deal? And is it the best thing for the country?
Yeah, I take your point on Labour being sort of, I don't know if I would go as far as to say they were helping the Tories achieve Brexit, but I definitely agree that there's maybe more they could do. But I feel like they're in a difficult position given that they want to respect the result of the referendum whilst sort of...
70% of their own voters were anti-Brexit. Now...
So why have the Lib Dems not been able to capitalise on it?
Well, what do you mean? Why? Well, it's not. See, if you like, I feel that question almost, don't take this the wrong way, encapsulates what is wrong with the entire debate.
Okay.
It's not about the Liberal Democrats scoring points. It's about what is best for the country, which is what the Conservatives seem to have lost sight of. They're tied up in an internal civil war about, no deal or deal or, we can all see that they're making a complete mess of Brexit. It's taking longer than they said, it's costing more than they said, it's more complicated than they said, and it's just all confusion. As for the Labour Party, well, they're letting their own voters down because they're backing it. Now, it's not about scoring points, it's about what is best for the country. And they both seem to have lost sight of that. They're both involved in internal war. Now, for you and I, for our future, for our family's future, our friends, for our jobs, our mortgages, the cost of food, the medicines that we'll have access to, and for a lot of people, remember, that's life-threatening. For all of that, what we need is an end to the chaos and a proper look at exactly what this is going to mean. We're not getting that from this government. When you say we can't capitalise, we don't want to capitalise on anything. We want the best thing for the country. What we want is to demand that we get a better deal and that our young people get the best opportunities. And that's not going to happen unless we sort out this mess.
That's probably one of the best answers I've heard to that particular point in the entire debate. So thank you for that. It's lovely to hear a bit of rational thought sometimes. How likely do you think we are to arrive at a no-deal scenario?
Oh, that thought terrifies me. That is unthinkable. And the fact that we've got leading politicians in this country saying it's likely frightens the life out of me. I could put it more rudely, but I won't. It frightens the life out of me.
Feel free to. I don't censor anyone.
I mean, they really have the responsibility to deliver something that's good for the British people and not just what's good for them in terms of their, leadership campaign for the Conservative Party or, their party's positioning for the next general election. This should be about what is best for the country. No deal. Having a no deal is unimaginable. I mean, can you imagine what it's going to be like for us all if that happens? Come April next year, if we've no deal, we go into World Trade Organization terms. We won't know if our airplanes will be able to take off and land in Europe. We don't know if the Eurostar will be able to go to Paris. We don't know if our lorries will be able to take food across the channel. We don't know if we'll be able to get food. And medicines, when you get to the stage where the government's admitting that it's stockpiling vital medicines, there's something wrong. This is like World War II, and it shouldn't be like that. There's no need for it in the first place. And certainly to think that the government have allowed it to get to this stage is incomprehensible.
Yeah, it's really utterly terrifying. The fact that the talk of World Trade Organization rules being completely normal and fine and what everyone else does is probably the scariest part for me. The fact that the largest company the largest country that I can find that trades exclusively on World Trade Organization rules is Mauritania, that has a GDP that is 0.2% the size of the UK, and somewhere between 1 and 17% of the population still live in slavery. That's the biggest company, or that's the biggest country, that I can find that trades.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's really terrifying to seeing these huge institutions like the IEA and Adam Smith all just pushing this idea that it'll be fine, we're all going to be okay.
Well, say that. I haven't actually. That's news to me, because the organisations I'm hearing are saying, no, we won't be fine.
Well, I would urge you to look at a report by DSmog UK that shows the web of sort of anti-climate change think tanks that are being funded by wealthy US donors who are offering cash for access to UK government ministers like Steve Baker, Liam Fox, Michael Gove. It's a really great piece of reporting, and it really gives you a good idea of the people pushing the hard Brexit narrative.
But those are people pushing hard Brexit. I'm not talking about people pushing hard Brexit. What I'm saying is I haven't heard anybody who doesn't have, if you like, an axe to grind, who is, a reputable body saying, yeah, it's a great idea. All the people that I talk to, all the organisations, businesses who aren't part of the campaign but who are dependent on it, say this is madness. How can we, they're doing their best to deal with the uncertainty of not knowing exactly what's going to happen. But all the big organisations in this country who stand to be affected by it, you'll find that they consistently say, this is not going to work. The universities are crying out for something to do. I was at my daughter's graduation the day Boris Johnson resigned. It's quite funny in a way. It was ironic and sad, but I got a text message while I was there to say, we think Boris Johnson's about to resign. It will be confirmed shortly. Then I got a text message to say, confirmed, Boris Johnson has resigned. At that point, the founder and creator of the Erasmus scheme was receiving an honorary doctorate from Edinburgh University. And he was talking about his vision what had prompted the Erasmus scheme, how it had worked, about all the people who'd been involved, the things that had come out of it, the international cooperation, the people who'd come, to this country to study and had brought their culture here and then taken the ideas from this country back there. He talked about the 1 million Erasmus babies that have been born, and about the sort of international cooperation that it engenders when an entire generation of people in influential positions or working in companies across Europe have learned from one another and have worked together. And when he was finished, he got a huge round of applause from the students. And when I looked at that student body gathered for the graduation, it was an amazingly diverse group. And the names going up, there were names from all over Europe, French names, German names, Italian names, students who've come here because Edinburgh has the country's biggest percentage of Erasmus students. And the principal stood up and, thanked him for his speech and then said, and I want to make a promise that Edinburgh University will continue to look to Europe and will continue regarding itself as European, regardless of the obstacles that politicians are putting in our way. I heard that and I thought, you know what? That's exactly what this is about. These young people, their opportunities are being narrowed. Not just their educational opportunities, their employment opportunities, their opportunities for personal growth and for understanding, for cultural interaction between us and the rest of Europe. It's been narrowed by Brexit. We are backing ourselves into a narrow little nationalist corner, but the only thing we know about and the only thing we'll understand is British. And I don't think that's what the majority of people in this country, regardless of how we voted, that's what they want. That's why it's important that they see the final deal, that they get a chance to say, actually, no, that's not what I wanted. I maybe wanted out of the political institutions, but I don't want to leave the cultural institutions. I don't want to leave the economic institutions, but I didn't want to leave the political ones. Or, do you know what? Leaving the political institutions is not worth the price of leaving the economic ones. Or maybe they wanted to leave the economic ones but not the political ones, and see the opposite and think, this deal, whatever it is, whenever we find out about it, is not good for me, for my family, for the future, for all our jobs and all our standard and cost of living. That's why it's important that we get a look at this. Now, if it's no deal, that's even worse. But this is not about now. This is not about, I hope, for any politician, this should not be about votes. It should not be about positioning for a general election, or even worse, positioning for a leadership election. It should be about what is best for the country. And I think that's why, if you like, we've never moved from that position, because a fundamental part of being a liberal is being an internationalist and wanting the best interaction to get the best for this country from being part of that wider world. And that's what we see under threat, and why you will not find us backing down or moving away from that position. That is what is best for this country, and that's what's important.
Well, as long as someone is looking out for our best interests, I would much prefer it was every party, but it's nice to hear that there's at least someone attempting to look out, because I think that's probably the most frustrating part of the whole thing, is the fact that really it doesn't feel like anyone's going, well, if it does crash the economy, what are we going to do? Like I haven't heard anyone say that, and that's probably like... Yeah.
Well, what you'll hear, or you will have heard Tom Brake, the Liberal Democrat spokesperson on Brexit, say, what you'll have heard Vince Cable say, what you'll have heard me say, is that this is not what is best for us. And, if it crashes the economy, what are we going to do? And that's where you get back into the fact that the government hasn't a clue what it's doing, apparently. They're making a total mess of it. But, it's time that they were the ones who originally said that this had to be the people's decision. That? They said that's why they went to the referendum. This had to be up to the people. Well, you know what? Now we're getting to the crunch. And the people should have the final say, because it's only now that they can see what this deal, when we finally get it, will mean. And I think we all deserve the chance to say, do you know what, that's not a good deal. That's not what's best. That's not what we wanted. I think we should demand that. And we're leading the fight, as you said, to stop Brexit. And we're demanding that it is those people that get the right, not the politicians. And so far, we've got more than 200,000 supporters. We're speaking with millions of people every day. And I think that, you know, at the end of this, we will be the ones who have made a difference. And that moving forward, the Conservatives are going to have a major problem if they impose this deal, whatever it might be, on the British people without the British people having a chance to say, no, that's not what we wanted.
Yeah, well, I personally hope we get to have a people's vote on the final deal. I feel like that's probably
I'm with you.
the reasonable way to deal with things, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
No,
well, you know where you can sign the petition?
I have, and I will
Excellent.
put it in the description of this interview when we put it up online. So if anyone's
Excellent.
listening, they can sign it if they haven't already. Now, there's been a lot of talk, mainly by the press, and occasionally by Tony Blair, about the need for a new centrist third party in the UK to oppose Brexit. And there was me thinking we already had one of them. But like, where is this talk coming from? Like, why do you think it's getting any traction at all, given that that's literally the mantra of the Liberal Democrats?
It's getting traction because people are fed up with the positions of the Conservative Party and the Labour Party, frankly. That's why it's getting traction. How much traction it's getting amongst the chattering classes? Yeah. I mean, politicians and, you know, the press and, we've got a third party. We've got a centrist party, but we've got a party that's committed to the EU, and it's called the Liberal Democrats. If you look back to the 80s, we discovered then how difficult it is in this country to establish a third party. The SDP, that's what their aim was. They couldn't do it, not a third party, a new party. They couldn't do it. We've been around for a couple of hundred years, so we're established as a national party. But the SDP couldn't do it. UKIP was a single-issue campaign, and they tried their very best for more than a decade to get in to Westminster, and they weren't successful. The Greens have only got one MP after all the time and effort, money, support that they've had. So talking about setting up another party, it's a wee bit pie in the sky. How is it going to happen? How are they going to break through? We are the centre party. We are the pro-European party. We are here.
You see, I remember having a conversation in my politics class many years ago about how recessions and economic sort of downturns tend to create or bump up an extra sort of third option, especially in two-party dominated systems.
Yeah.
And I find it interesting that the 2008 crash, given that it was probably the biggest one we'd had in 20 or 30 years, ended up being the one that didn't actually create that a new party. And
well,
unless you count the rise of UKIP, which we'd be totally.
If you look at 2008 and the crash, remember it was a worldwide crash. You did get Macron in France, and you did get Justin Trudeau in Canada. And unfortunately, you also got Donald Trump in America, all rising out of this recession. What you got in this country was a desire, in the same way that they had a desire for change, different sorts of change, very different sorts of change in America from the desire in Canada and France. But you also got a desire for some sort of change in this country, which we saw through the referendum. We saw, that, if you like, justifies what you're saying. We saw it through the referendum, but now what we're seeing is, if you like, the backlash to that, which is, well, actually, no, that's not the change that we wanted, because that's not going to solve our economic problems. It's going to make it worse. I'm not saying that the argument that you had at university was wrong. I'm just saying that it's not quite as simple as you get a new political party.
It was in my GCSE politics class, so it wasn't quite as sophisticated as a university discussion.
So you can look at times when there's been like the recession. You can look at the crash in the 20s. You never really get a new. In America, for example, you don't get new parties. But what you did get this time was Trump, who's a completely new and very strange and dangerous phenomenon. Populist politicians. In this country, in the 20s, you saw the rise of the Labour Party. Now here we are again. Will we see change? Actually, you know what? I think we haven't seen it yet. I think what we've seen with the rise of things like the popularity of the People's Vote campaign, what we're seeing now in the sort of backlash to the extreme Brexiteers is a movement towards the centre. That's why you're getting this talk. It's because the press and politicians are very aware that people are moving towards the centre, that public opinion is moving towards the centre, and that neither the Conservatives nor the Labour Party fill that role. But we do.
Well, hopefully we'll at some point in the future see some sort of electoral reform that will give the Liberal Democrats and any other third parties more.
Oh, you're preaching to the choir there.
Yeah. Do you think that there's any chance of seeing that discussed again in the next 10 years after the AV referendum sort of didn't quite go over?
The AV referendum wasn't it was a particular sort of PR, but you've already got PR in Scotland.
We have it in Northern Ireland as well.
Yeah, you've got it in Northern Ireland and in Wales as well. You've got change. You've got electoral reform. England is holding out and Westminster is holding out. But you know what? All of it depends on what happens next after we either get out of this Brexit mess by stopping it, or we find ourselves the other side of it and trying to cope with it. That will determine where we go next. And if we get electoral change, it will be because people have had the opportunity and see that two-party politics got them into this mess, and that having an opposition that was ineffective in the Labour Party really underlines the need for a stronger third party, as an opposition which is not just dependent on one party leadership. And I think we'll see that more and more. And you may well get electoral reform. And you know what? It may well, that electoral reform will probably depend on the strength of the Liberal Democrats, because we're the ones who fought for it before, we're the ones who fought for it for decades, and we will continue to fight for it.
Yeah, I think the referendum was unfairly sunk by David Cameron, but that's his reasoning. His reasoning is probably fairly obvious. I would like to make the point as well that PR, given like Northern Ireland has proportional representation by single transferable vote, which is arguably one of the most representative electoral systems.
We have that in local government in Scotland.
We don't have a government right now, so it doesn't always lead to better governance. Well, I think Northern Ireland, I think we all need to accept, particularly at the moment with the difficulties over the Northern Irish border, that the European negotiations are causing, and the scale of that problem. I think we all need to accept that you can't just put Northern Ireland into a pigeonhole. A pigeonhole does not exist for Northern Ireland. You cannot look at Northern Ireland and say, well, the government has collapsed, therefore it's PR's fault. There are other issues in Northern Ireland. No, I'm well
aware. You cannot blame PR. We have, in Scotland, we have single transferable votes on the local authorities. And we have the Hunt system, which is a top-up list at the Scottish Parliament. So we've got two different systems there, and they both work perfectly well. And, you know, we've become used to that as a reasonable way of moving forward. We've seen movement in, you know, who controls power. We've seen sort of consensus being necessary to move forward. The SNP had to do it in 2007 to 2011. They're having to do it again with much less success. The Labour Party had to build consensus with us and the Liberal Democrats in the first two parliaments, and that worked. And you find that with a proportional representation system, regardless of what the great defenders of first past the post might say, that once you get into a more representative PR system, they work together. And to me, that's what politicians should be doing. They should have to sit round the table and decide on the best way forward. The fact that one government's in power, one party's in power for 20 years, as we've had in this country recently, and every budget is decided by that party, and every budget is decided along their political, ideological lines. Is that fair? Is that representative of everybody in the country? No, not really, when they don't necessarily have a massive majority or massive support. So the fact that they have to sit down with the other parties and say, look, can we build consensus here? Can we build something that everybody agrees with? Then I think that's a good thing. And I think the closer we get to that in the UK, the better off we'll all be. And you know what? We probably wouldn't be in this Brexit mess because David Cameron on his own and the Conservative Party would not have been able to say, do you know what, we'll have a referendum. They would have had to have built a consensus with the other parties on exactly what was going to happen, instead of where we are now when we're just in chaos.
I think it's something that's really interesting. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts actually on this, is this how salient the sort of coalition of chaos thing continues to be at every election for the Conservative Party to sort of slam Labour, or just like any idea of there being a non-majority party in Westminster, and this sort of like strong and stable government cliche that David Cameron pushed and then Theresa May pushed to varying degrees of success. What do you think it is about this idea of a coalition that British people, or maybe even more specifically English people, have such an aversion to?
I don't think it's anything to do with English people or any British people having an aversion to it. I think it's just the system that we've had for several hundred years, and it takes a lot for people to change that. And also, it's the old turkeys voting for Christmas thing. Why would the Conservative Party introduce a system which makes it more difficult for them to have power? Why would the Labour Party support it? Because at the moment they see a situation where with first past the post they can have a majority. And so they don't really want to give that up. So it's up to the rest of us who think that perhaps it's not representative of people to try and persuade them and to fight for it. I remember years ago, my mother and father were both Conservatives, and they lived in a part of the country in Scotland that always voted Labour. Without fail, it voted Labour, massive majorities. And they did not feel that they were represented necessarily by the system. But once the Parliament was set up and we had proportional representation, my mother was well aware that she could go and she had 2 votes, and that for one of those votes she could vote for regional representation, which would ensure that she had a regional MP who reflected her views, that she would be represented. And that's the difference. It's when people are given the opportunity to ensure that their views are represented, that they will have that. That's what people want. People don't necessarily want, the biggest. It's like the biggest kid in the playground having the biggest stick and having all to say. No, they want more views to be represented. They want everybody's views to be represented, and for government, business, education, all to have voices speaking out with all views, and all views represented in a fair, proportionate way.
Well, that's democracy.
Yeah.
So just, I'm sure you're busy, so
I've actually got another meeting that I'm getting waved at here that I've got to hurry up and get to.
That's all right. Well,
so
do you have time for one more question, or do you have to?
Yeah. No, just one more.
Okay, well, you can give a short answer on this. Is devolution legitimately being challenged by the Brexit process, or will things all go back to normal once the the transition period would be
devolution being challenged?
Yes.
How do you mean?
There's been sort of the pullback of some powers that would be transferred directly to Holyrood
that is just SNP nonsense. There is no power grab. These powers were never at the Scottish Parliament. They were at Brussels. There's no power grab. There's no constitutional crisis. There's no rolling back of devolution. It just suits the SNP agenda to try and paint it that way, so that, they can try and, build support for another independence referendum. But that's not the case. What the debate is about is the frameworks within which those powers sit. Now, why on earth, you have to ask yourself about the SNP, incidentally, the SNP don't want Brexit either. So the SNP want the powers to stay at Brussels. So
I hadn't thought
what
about
is
it like
the
that,
problem?
actually.
They actually want the powers to stay in Brussels. So what is their argument? That they have the powers from London and then they become independent and they give the powers to Brussels? That doesn't make sense to me. Also, if they are so keen to stop this, what they term a power grab, and frankly isn't, why aren't they backing people's vote? Why is it all, I'll tell you why. It's because everything the SNP do, absolutely everything, and we have this from some of their MSPs, I've said it publicly, everything they do is about independence. Everything is about building that narrative grievance against the United Kingdom. That's what this is about. There's no threat to devolution, except from the SNP.
Right, well, that's a lovely note to leave it on. And Christine, thank you very much for chatting to me. I had a lot of fun.
You're very welcome.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget you can subscribe to us on Facebook, on Twitter, on iTunes, on Spotify. Later this week, we're going to have an interview with Barney Scholes, who's the press officer at the People's Vote campaign. So if you're interested in the campaign to have a second vote on the Brexit deal, then be sure to tune in for that. Till next time, thanks for listening.